Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. The division championship Minnesota Twins are looking to go all the way to the World Series in 2024. Bolstered by inspirational shortstop Carlos Correa, a healthy Brian Buxton, and rookie phenom Royce Lewis, plus a pitching staff led by Pablo Lopez and an outstanding bullpen featuring Johan Duran, the Twins are the best bargain in the major leagues, and Target Field is the best venue in baseball. Sheridan Dulas & Kins, PA, a family and criminal defense law firm, has been serving clients in Dakota County and throughout Minnesota for over 40 years. Ranked a Tier 1 Best Law Firm by U.S. News and World Report every year since 2009, Sheridan Dulas & Kins are here to help you in your most difficult life circumstances. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Access to Democracy. I'm your host, Steve Francisco. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. It's my pleasure to welcome back to our program today a guest who has been with us previously. We have Jake Loesch, who is the Executive Director of the Citizens League. Jake, welcome back to Access to Democracy.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be back with you. I appreciate it.
So for our viewers who maybe didn't see your first interview with us, which I think was over a year ago or so, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to school.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my name is Jake Loesch, as you said. I grew up in the North Metro in Spring Lake Park. I graduated from the University of Minnesota Duluth. Minnesotan, born and raised, have spent most of my life here. I've worked for the legislature for a period of time. I've worked on some political campaigns, and most recently, before I started as Executive Director of Citizens League, I ran communications and public engagement at the Department of Transportation.
Very good. Do you have any thoughts about how any of your previous job experience helped prepare you to work at the Citizens League?
Well, that's a great question. I think what I realized once I started at the League was that a lot of my past jobs have really all kind of involved that intersection of communications and government and advocacy. I've worked in very partisan roles and in very nonpartisan roles in my career.
Which do you prefer?
Nonpartisan, for sure. I have hung up my hat on the political campaigns probably for the rest of my life. And that's just an indication of, we grow up, our views can evolve and change. And I really found that I enjoy the work of bringing people together and kind of developing policies that work for as many people as possible. And that's not constricted by party lines.
Right.
Yeah.
And when did you become Executive Director of the Citizens League?
I started in September of 2023, but had been on our board of directors for about 5 years prior to that. So I'd been close to the organization for several years, and then had the opportunity to start leading it about a year and a half ago.
So tell us, what is the Citizens League? What is your organization's mission?
The Citizens League is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and I like to say that we focus on two things: civic engagement and empowering people to be involved in public policy. So that can take a lot of forms. We do a lot of public policy research. We just wrapped up an exciting project on local government workforce, which I'm sure we'll get to talk a little bit about. We run an internship program called Capital Pathways, which specifically pairs up BIPOC college students with host organizations to get that real-world direct experience at the state capitol and in public policy making. And we host a number of educational events, truly trying to give people that opportunity to see a range of perspectives and broad ideas about different public policy topics.
And just so we're very clear, as a nonprofit, you're a 501c3?
Correct. Yep.
So
and we were first founded in 1952. So we're actually
ask you that
a lot older than most people think. We're coming up on just over 73 years since the Citizens League was first started.
That's older than me. That's saying something. As a 501c3, too, just so our viewers know, you do not endorse political candidates for
Correct.
office, but you do sometimes take positions on public policy issues.
Right. As a 501c3, correct. We can't endorse candidates. We can't encourage people to vote a certain way for or against any one or topic. But as a public policy research organization, some people might be familiar with the idea of a think tank. We've never really used that to describe ourselves, but there are some similarities between the work. We have and certainly will take positions primarily on work that we've studied or researched. So over our history, the Citizens League has been a part of some pretty significant policy reforms in Minnesota. The Metropolitan Council, for example, came to be out of a report that the Citizens League was a part of leading. Charter schools is another example. In the early 90s, when charter schools were created, it was a Citizens League report on school choice that led to the creation of charter schools in Minnesota. And Minnesota was the first state to establish charter schools, which are now across the country.
Let's circle back, if we could, for just a moment to the Metropolitan Council, which I think, as you just mentioned, it's one of the signature achievements of the Citizens League and lobbying for that. Because prior to that time that the Met Council was created, you pretty much had local cities and counties kind of doing their own thing without any coordination whatsoever, which becomes very problematic or tricky when you talk about issues like transportation, delivery of public services. Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was really the crux of the report, and several years of study and research from in the earliest days of the Citizens League in the 1950s, mid to late 1950s. Looking at that, it's almost a foregone conclusion now, this many years on, that a regional form of governance does serve an important purpose. I also want to acknowledge that over the years, the Metropolitan Council has changed. It oversees a lot of different things that it didn't necessarily back in the earliest days, and there are certainly political and policy disagreements about the role of the Met Council, but really as a core function, this idea that things like wastewater and sewer, those are things that we don't want to see divided up city by city, that there should be, no matter where you find yourself in a metropolitan region, in an urban core, or the suburbs, that you're going to have similar access to similar services. And I think that was the idea, a novel idea then, but certainly one now that is also replicated across the country, that these sort of metropolitan units of government have a role to play.
That's what I was going to ask you. So we were at the forefront, Minnesota was, in creating the Met Council, and has it been replicated? I think you just indicated it has, by other metropolitan areas in the country. Do you know what some of those might be?
I know like Seattle has one, Chicago. There's a lot of them, and they all take different forms, right? You've got to kind of build them towards what your community is and what the needs may be. I don't know if we were the first, or if maybe some of our research also learned lessons from other areas where that kind of metropolitan unit of government had been tried. And there are differences as well, questions that continue to be debated in our legislature today about whether members of the council should be appointed or elected, how large their regions should be. And I think
how are they chosen in Minnesota?
Right now they're appointed by the governor. And that is certainly a point of discussion and debate that as long as I've been involved in politics in Minnesota has been something that has been discussed. And I think that is sort of a good example and indicative of the work the League wants to do, right? There are these big kind of policy questions that we want to answer. What best serves as many people as possible? What does the common good look like? Where are our shared values and opportunities? And how can we translate that into public policy?
Jake, I think you might agree with me. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you might agree with me if I were to make the observation we are living in very politically polarized times right now, both at the national level. We're also seeing it at the state level in a way that we probably haven't seen in many, many years, especially where the division of political power in the legislature. You have a House that's evenly split. You have a Senate that's very close. What are your thoughts about this? Is it more difficult for an organization like yours to try to help people to find common ground politically than it has been in the past? Do you see that reflected in your interactions with citizens?
I do, and I think I agree with the statement completely. We are living in very polarized, very divided, very challenging times. We could probably talk for hours about why that is to begin with, but the reality is that it's true. And Minnesota is probably one of the best examples of that right now, with the legislature divided, as you said, almost evenly split, and the House is down the middle, 67-67. I think it creates a real dynamic that makes our work harder, certainly, because people are more entrenched in kind of their tribes on either side, if you will, their party or their identity. That makes it harder to see and be open to other perspectives. I would also say that while it's harder, it makes our work that much more important.
Mm-hmm. And so in that regard, how are you able to bring people together? What does the Citizens League do to try to help people find that common ground?
Well, we do it, I mean, I would start with even the way that our organization is constructed. We do it with our board of directors, for example, to be sure every year when we add new board members that we have a range of perspectives, geography, politics, background, race and ethnicity, identity. We really try and make sure that our board reflects the population that we serve. We do it through our Capital Pathways internship program, which is trying to help diversify the legislature. It's been going on for 10 years. Not just the legislature, I apologize, the whole public policy making process, and giving college students, particularly those who identify as people of color, the opportunity to get those pathways directly into public policy. We hear from these students all the time that, sure, they've driven by the Capitol, they know government exists, but they just had no way of accessing it, being a part of it, understanding all the different job opportunities that existed in that space. And that, you know, it sometimes comes down to simple things like social capital. Do you know people who work in politics or government? Do you have people encouraging you to get involved? Do you have that support system and that network? And if that doesn't exist, it makes engaging in politics and civic engagement more broadly a much more difficult task, and it's easy to understand why people tune out.
That seems like a really important point to me, Jake, because it would seem to be common sense that we want to have state government and local government reflect the people of Minnesota, reflect the communities that we live in. And the truth is, demographically, Minnesota has changed tremendously over the past 30, 40 years. Even in the past 20 years, I would say. You see significant numbers of people in Minnesota who probably didn't live here in large numbers in previous years. And even in rural communities, you would think that ethnic diversity or cultural diversity is unique to the metro area, but that's not true, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, there are some communities, I think of Wilmer, for example, where there's a growing Somali population, Latino populations around the state.
Worthington, southwestern
Worthington,
Minnesota.
yeah, another great example. There are a lot of these. It's a great reality, right? That our state is diversifying. It looks very different than we used to. And, you know, for people like you and I who look a certain way, we're white men, we've never felt what it feels like to look at your government and people making decisions about your community, whether local government, state government, or onward. We've never felt what that feels like to not see yourself or your own experiences represented. So I think there is an important value in not choosing one or the other, but making sure that everyone has that opportunity to get that pathway and to be involved in public policy. And we've seen that through some of the alumni surveys we've done on our Capital Pathways program. The majority of those students continue to work in policy. They've gone on to run for office. They've gone on to work at lobbying firms, at state agencies, from here to DC. It's really been an incredible experience to see.
And a great thing about Minnesota in terms of, I think it relates to Capital Pathways too, is that we have a School of Public Policy, Public Affairs at the Humphrey Institute. Other colleges and universities in the Twin Cities Metro offer courses in public policy. So there really are opportunities here for you to cultivate this as a career interest for people.
Absolutely. And you named the Humphrey School. Several of
you attended the Humphrey, I believe, didn't you?
I did a fellowship at the Humphrey School after I graduated. But, you know, the U of M, the Humphrey School, Augsburg, St. Thomas, several of these colleges have been longtime partners of ours. What else we've loved to have seen over the years of the Capital Pathways program is the growth into Greater Minnesota. We now have at least, last year, about 25% of our students attended colleges outside the Twin Cities metro area, which of course creates some transportation challenges for them, but also we want to see that. We want to see those rural communities and schools represented as well.
Jake, I'd like to get your opinion about an issue that's been in the news and caused some controversy recently, particularly at the federal level. We've seen, federal and state level across the country, attacks on so-called DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. What are your thoughts about this? Because it would seem that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what DEI is, first of all. And also, aren't these attacks on inclusion and equity kind of contrary to the mission of an organization like yours? What are your thoughts about some of these assaults on DEI initiatives?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking, and I think it's a difficult question that a lot of people are grappling with right now. Do companies turn away from DEI? Do they end those programs completely? Do they lean into them, right? How do we react in the situation? For us, we remain completely committed to our Capital Pathways program. I think that it's a value of ours that everyone, people of all backgrounds, identities, politics, ethnicities, geographies, have similar opportunities to engage in public policy making. And there was a need identified a long time ago that one could see the state legislature, for example, and most of the staff and people working around the Capitol looked a certain way, leaving out a lot of people who had great feedback, great things to contribute, great life experience that should be a part of our policymaking process. And so I think we often end up in this black and white, this or that conversation about whether DEI is good or bad. And I'm not going to say that maybe there aren't times where programs that are so-called DEI may contribute to disparities in their own way. But I would also argue that there are a lot of ways in which looking at DEI, not getting caught up in the buzzwords of DEI is bad or good, but how are we making sure that we're creating pathways and opportunities for people, just people, to get involved in public policy making? Because I think that's the most important thing for us at Citizens League. That's what matters the most, is that we create opportunities for as many people as possible to be represented on the basic belief and value of ours that the best public policy comes when the most voices are a part of forming it.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about a recently released report by your organization about the local government workforce and some of the challenges and opportunities. Tell us about this report that the Citizens League recently issued about this matter.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity, really great partnership we had with the League of Minnesota Cities and the Association of Minnesota Counties. And we spent about 6 months digging in, talking to local government, elected officials, and employees at all levels around the state. We did a number of in-person meetings, we had a survey, and ultimately got feedback from close to 950 people, the majority of whom are working in local governments right now. So
counties,
working
cities.
In their city, primarily cities and counties, although we also talked to some school boards and others. And I think what really became fascinating, the main question we were trying to answer is in response to what cities and counties themselves have been sort of raising as a concern for a while, that hiring and retaining good talent to work in local government has become harder and harder. And our charge was to try and identify why that is. I will tell you, when we started this project, I maybe expected we'd come up with 5 to 10 recommendations that hopefully would go forth and help solve the problem. The report we put out has no less than 36 recommendations. And why that is because directly responding to the feedback and the thoughtfulness with which folks approached this topic and shared their experiences and insights with us, there were not only 5 issues that we could solve.
Right.
There were several topics, and within those topics, things like salary and benefits and training opportunities and networking opportunities and tensions between partisan elected officials and nonpartisan staff. There's a lot of areas that were identified. And so I think what we felt, partly to honor the amount of feedback and time and thoughtfulness that these employees at local governments put in, we couldn't pick and choose. We had to sort of give a full scope of, listen, there are a lot of topics and there are a lot of things. Not all of these recommendations are going to be applicable to everyone, but there's probably something here that'll fit any community.
It seems that Citizens League has really done a great public service by bringing this issue up, because I think it would be fair to say Minnesotans in general have become accustomed to a very high level of local government service, both at the county level, at city and municipal level. We expect government to work.
We do.
For Minnesotans. We pay taxes, we expect good services, whether it's police, firefighting, other services that local government provides. And so it's really important to ask this question: how do we retain people to replace people that may be retiring or moving on? And what are the challenges that we run into? I want to ask you about one of those challenges and get your take on it. It seems that we hear a lot of attacks in the news these days against government employees. It's been particularly pronounced at the federal level, but it's also, I think some of that has seeped down to the state and local level, critiques of government employees that may not be very well informed and can often, it's often under the guise of greater government efficiency and greater service. Nobody, I don't think, would argue that there aren't places where there could be effective cuts to make government work better. But that isn't really the issue. It's when you paint public employment with a broad brush and attacking government workers and treating them badly. And frankly, I would think as a young person, you might look at that and say, why would I want to go into government service? Why would I want to subject myself to that? Another issue probably would have to do, I would guess, with compensation. Are pay rates in local government competitive with the private sector?
Well, I'll start with that one, and then I want to answer the other question too. We surveyed our respondents specifically on that question about salary and benefits and asked them what they thought, because I think the question for us was, how do people perceive it, right? Maybe not necessarily what is actually the case, but do people think they're comparable or not? That tells us a lot about how people are viewing what jobs they may proceed with. And what we found was almost a 50-50 split down the middle. About half the people we talked to said, yeah, they're pretty comparable to private sector, and half said, no, not even close. And I think that really comes down to a big question of, while the salary themselves in a lot of cases may not be comparable to a similar job in the private sector, often the benefits and the work-life balance and the time and the pensions that come with jobs in local government certainly outweigh what we see in the private sector. And of course, none of these are absolutes. There are certain situations where it may be different, but those are some general themes we saw. To the point about kind of demonizing government employees, I think that, to me, that is probably one of the most unfortunate things we've seen over the last several years, decades, however long it's been happening. Because what you said earlier was true. In a place like Minnesota, we've become accustomed to a very high level of services, almost so much that we take them for granted. But what we forget is that that is people in those institutions making that happen. And we won't think about all of those services that our city or our county or other governments provide until they're gone. And when we realize they're not there, we're going to really miss them. And so I think getting out ahead of some of those recruitment and retention challenges and trying to look at this report from that really holistic perspective of what are all the elements coming into play here. Because I would even think about, some of the report may be more grounded in what could a city or a county do to make it a better environment to hire or to keep their employees. But think about this situation. You're a rural county, you've got to hire an engineer or a really skilled position. Your candidate pool is already going to be smaller. Your salary that you can offer may be different than the metro area or other private sector jobs. So you've got already a low unemployment rate in Minnesota, much lower than the national average. So it's a job seekers market, if you will. They can move, they can find opportunities. And maybe I'm someone who says, yeah, I'd really love to work in local government. I really want to serve my community. But you know what? That job, it's far away. I have to relocate. I can't find childcare. I can't find a house. So why would I move to that community when I can find a similar job closer to where I am, right? There's a lot of ancillary things that come into those job seekers' decisions. And so it's not just even a question of what cities or counties can do, but there's a lot of other policy things. We face a housing crisis. Childcare in Minnesota is, I believe, the third most expensive state in the country. These are real challenges that if you're a job seeker,
baby boomers aging,
they're retiring. There's going to be a lot of, that's another thing we heard a lot of is folks saying, look, I feel like I do 2 or 3 people's jobs right now, and when I retire, there's no succession plan in place. There's no one to take my seat. What are we going to do? Who's going to take on those challenges? How am I going to pass on the information I've learned in my 30 years in public service? There's real challenges here, but the thing I'd like to emphasize about this is I think Minnesotans can remain optimistic and very comfortable in knowing, we talked to, like I said, over 900 people, and the vast majority of those folks always got through to make sure that they talked about how important and how much they believed in and how dedicated they were to serving their community and to their work. There's a passion that drives local government employees, and I really want to respect and honor that because they do tough jobs, often in isolation. They're not seeing people very often. The time can be challenging. They may be working at odd hours, but these are folks who really care about their community and want to deliver good services, and we need to support them.
We should be thankful that we have public employees who have that attitude.
Absolutely.
And that's been true, I think, more times than not. So when one hears these sweeping attacks on government employees, whether it's at state and local level or at the federal level, really need to be very suspect about those kind of sweeping accusations.
Yeah, I think it's an important opportunity to ask questions.
Right.
Because while there may be some truth, again,
that's
I think
not to say things can't be done better, that there aren't efficiencies that
Absolutely.
can be discovered, but just to denigrate and attack government employees. I've had conversations with people in the past where they've had very anti-government attitudes, and I say, yeah, a lot of people hate government until they realize you really need it. If you drive down a public street in Minnesota, you need government.
Yeah.
If you need to call the police or the fire department, you need government.
Yeah.
If you have kids in schools, you need government.
And it's our form of government, right? I mean, what's the saying? Democracy is the worst form of government except for about
Except
everything
for all
else
the
that's
others,
ever been
right.
tried, right?
Board Act,
There are key elements that are really important things that government serves. And as a general rule, denigrating or attacking one group of people entirely is always a bad idea.
Right. I want to ask you too, Jake, we're down to about 3.5 minutes here. Interconnected, your rural-urban conversations, which the Citizens League has sponsored. What have you learned from sponsoring those conversations?
Oh, it's been a fascinating partnership with the Center for Rural Policy and Development, a really great organization, also nonpartisan, that focuses on public policy outcomes from the rural perspective. So they really represent that rural voice and rural communities around the state. And we've been doing this partnership with them for several years, and I think what has been fascinating to me on a variety of topics, we've talked about migration patterns and healthcare and childcare and housing, is often there are shared outcomes and opportunities, no matter whether rural and urban communities. I mean, we tackle these conversations and topics to try and represent both of those viewpoints and give attendees the opportunity to learn and hear from both sides. But what often comes up is, hey, we're not all that dissimilar. There are lots of great reasons people choose to live in an urban community. There are lots of great reasons people choose to live in a rural community. Rural Minnesota is not dying, as is often sort of this case in this rural-urban divide. And so I think this conversation series has been a great way to almost myth bust, if you will, that these topics we're not so dissimilar on, and ultimately we all want the same things. We all want good services and safe communities, whether I live in a rural community or an urban community. How we deliver those things and what they may need, what the sort of equation to put it all together is going to be different for the community, but they're not so diametrically opposed as we often get to.
That's a really important point, because for Minnesota to be what it is, to continue to be what it is, we have to have vibrant rural communities.
Absolutely.
We have to have job opportunities. We have to have adequate housing.
Well, that's where a lot of our food comes from, so let's not forget.
That's really important point. So, it's good to Minnesota's overall economic health, and it benefits people in the metro area just as much as it does people in the rural communities.
Absolutely. When Minneapolis is thriving, Matamidi can thrive more. When Bemidji is doing well, Blaine in the north suburbs is doing well, right? We live in a very interconnected, that's why we called the series Interconnected.
I want to ask you finally, you have an annual civic celebration coming up. Tell us about that real quickly. When is it? Where is it?
April 10th at Quincy Hall in Northeast Minneapolis. There will still be time to buy tickets through April 7th, so if anyone's interested, we'd love to have you join us. This is our annual gala. Our annual celebration will be honoring two incredible leaders, Peter Bell, a former chair of the Metropolitan Council, and Sharon McMahon, who is better known as America's government teacher online. She rose to prominence in 2020 with a really fantastic way that she's an educator herself, and she does a great job of providing just basic education about government and how it works and addressing misinformation. Fantastic leaders, and we're really excited to honor them on April 10th.
And to learn more about the work of the Citizens League, about the report that we talked about today, they can go to your website, which is?
citizensleague.org.
Jake Loesch of the Citizens League, thank you for being our guest today on Access to Democracy. Thank you for the work that you and your colleagues do that make Minnesota a better place to live. And come back and see us again.
I will. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Steve.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching this episode of Access to Democracy. You'll find more Access to Democracy at our website at accesstodemocracy.com.